All right, welcome everybody to Moths 101. Tonight's program, we are with Maurice Cullen again, and we are excited to have you all here. Just a few housekeeping things today. We ask that participants stay muted, and that you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat box feature. We will ask those questions at the end of the presentation tonight. So if you have anything that pops up, just go ahead. I'll be monitoring those throughout the program tonight. Before we get started, I just want to give a big thank you to our sponsor, Steel, for allowing us to have these free programs. This is our first year doing the virtual Butterfly Festival. So thank you guys for tuning in. We've had some really great turnout throughout the week. We have another free program coming up on Friday for monarch migrations and all of that information. So I recommend that you guys tune in for that as well. So again, we just want to give a big shout out to our sponsor, Steel, for making this possible. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Maurice for this. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen and we'll switch it over to him. And let's see, we'll get him unmuted.
You hear me?
Yep.
All right. All right. I will try to do this without any glitches. So, get that out of the way. All right. Good evening, everybody. Thanks again for tonight. The focus is moths. You know, last night it was mostly butterflies and those host plants, but tonight is the focus of moths and a lot of what we can find locally. So a lot of our local moths, and I'll discuss a few things about them. Don't know if we'll have a full hour. I guess it just depends on questions that we get along the way. But welcome on this Wednesday evening. So yes, that is my license plate. Got this when they came out with this beautiful Protect Pollinators plate. I thought, man, I got to get one of those, and I got to find something to put on there. And luckily enough, moths was available. So they had always been an interest of mine. And I've really gotten even more interested in them probably in the past 3 years than I have ever before. So I'm going to share some of that information with you. Well, one of the things a lot of people, they always want to know, well, what's the difference? What's the difference between a moth and a butterfly? Yeah, I know one's out at night mostly, but, and there are some generalizations. There are exceptions to every rule, and certainly in the butterfly and moth world. But in general, most moths have thicker body. Now the antennae, a lot of people go, oh yeah, well, they have those real feathery antennae, and I can tell that that's a moth, but really only some of the moths have antennae like that. There can be the feathery ones, which we call bipectinate. There's pectinate, which is more like a comb, where it's just a little bit of feathering on one side. And then there's the filiform, like our underwing moths have. That are very thin. So that's the antennae are highly variable. Unlike a butterfly, yep, it's that antennae and has a knob on the end. And if it's a skipper, it has a hook on the end. With the little knob. So with moths, there can be a lot of variability. There is actually a species of moth that imitates a butterfly so well that even its antennae have the little knobs on them. So it's an amazing world out there for the insects and how they evolve. They are typically very fuzzy or hairy. Many will spin a cocoon that covers the pupa. So they're still going to have a pupa. The cocoon itself is just still spun around, the pupa. A lot of moths actually will bury underground, forming a pupa. Some will make a cocoon up in a tree, but a lot of times it's like basically a naked pupa, or they'll have a very, very thin silk covering around that pupa. In general, they're going to be duller in coloration, not like those bright, shiny blues and things like that we see in butterflies, but you're going to find with some of the photos tonight, a lot of these moths can be quite spectacular and very pretty. So moths Not all moths, though, by the way, have a frenulum. I need to make that, but many moths will have a frenulum that joins the forewing and the hind wings together when they're flying. Not all moths have that frenulum, though, but many do. So it's a little hook-like protrusion there that kind of joins those wings and keeps them in sync as they're flying. Of course, behavior-wise, they're generally nocturnal. We know there are exceptions. There are day-flying moths. Attracted to lights, many species are. Again, not all. A lot of times, males tend to be a little more attracted to lights than females for whatever reason, for some species. Most of the wings are flattened and spread out over the body. So when moths land, butterflies, a lot of them, the wings are upright, over the abdomen, sitting there resting. Moths tend to have their wings spread out or flattened, against the body. And here's another interesting behavioral fact. A lot of moth species don't feed. They're going to have a short lifespan, probably 7 to 10 days. So they don't have the mouth parts that allow for any type of feeding. So some cool facts though about moths and why, for me, they're so interesting. They pretty much outnumber the butterflies 10 to 1. So you think about that. If you had 100 butterfly species, there's 1,000 moths to now look at. So, and in the U.S., we have about 11,000 species of moths. Worldwide, about 160,000. Moths are one of those groups, certainly in parts of the world, that there's many species still to be discovered. And some moths are extremely tiny, kind of overlooked. So there's lots of things that we can still learn about moths. There's a genus of moth caterpillar that's in Hawaii that is carnivorous. They actually sit there and they catch flies and other little insects, and that's how they get their nutrients to pupate. So again, like I mentioned before, some moth caterpillars, they don't eat plants, they eat lichens. We have a couple different species of lichen moths here. Some of them are quite striking. They're tiny though. There are some moth caterpillars that are actually aquatic that can feed on aquatic plants like water lilies. Largest moth in the world, Atlas moth, is a 12-inch wingspan, huge moths. They're Southeast Asia, they're not North American. They have evolved some interesting adaptations, though. When we talk about, some of the enemies of moths, they have a lot of the same enemies as butterflies do, as far as wasps and parasites and things like that. But because they're night flyers, well, bats are one of the main predators. And so tiger moths can actually produce an ultrasonic clicking sound that can jam the bat radar, the sonar. The Io moths, a lot of times they'll get hit by that sonar. They'll just kind of drop to the ground. I've seen that happen. Luna moths, those long tails on the Luna, well, they're not there just to make them pretty for us. They're actually an adaptation that allows the Lunas to kind of throw off the targeting of the bat as it's trying to get that moth. If the Luna loses those tails, the bat has a pretty good chance of zeroing right in and grabbing that moth by the abdomen and eating it. Of course, I've been out looking for moths at night, and I've had wings just kind of spiral down from the sky out of the darkness. And I know a bat's eating them, and he's just dropping the wings down. He got the nice meaty part that he wanted. So with a larger moth, I've seen that happen. So Polyphemus moth, that's one of our native moths there. And a lot of the moths, with those huge feathery antennae, I mean, they're all chemical sensors, just like you may have learned, with butterfly antennae. They can detect a molecule of the female pheromone about 7 miles away. And Polyphemus, for moth person like me, if I'm trying to raise some or get some eggs, if I have a female that has emerged, I can set her out in one of the little tents that we use, and males will show up. And I mean, even in the city of Norfolk, you would think, oh, in this neighborhood, there's no big moths like that. Oh no, they're there. They'll show up. So a lot of times they pick up that pheromone. You'll have several males showing up for that female that's releasing that. So it's like a nice perfume to them. Large silk moth like the Sucropia, the Loon, and the Polyphemus, like I mentioned earlier, those are the moths that don't have the mouth parts and will only live 7 to 10 days. So, and there are lots of moths within the other mini genus of moths that aren't able to feed. So even some of the smaller moths. Lots of caterpillars have stinging spines, and I'll show you some examples of 3 of those later on, and others will contain toxins, just like a lot of the butterfly caterpillars, depending on the plant they're feeding on, like monarchs, store that toxin from the milkweed. Pipevine stores that toxin from pipevine. A lot of these moth caterpillars are doing the same thing. They're going to store those chemicals from plants, and that makes them kind of distasteful to predators. And of course, there are day-flying moths. We'll look at a couple of examples of those. Some moths are migratory. All right, nothing as spectacular as the monarchs, but some do have migration routes. Moths are considered to be the older, of our Lepidoptera. So moths evolved about 250 million years ago. They're probably still finding more information about the prehistoric insect like that. There are moths that are wingless. You go, oh gosh, what? How do they get around? How do they mate? Well, it's typically the females that are wingless. If it's both members of the species, well then yeah, it's something that could be easily wiped out because they don't have that ability to fly, to move, to go to newer breeding grounds. And then great imitators for a lot of them look like bees and hornets and wasps, and I mean very, very good imitations of those organisms. And again, it's to protect themselves. If you're a day-flying moth and you look like a bee or a wasp, a lot of things aren't going to bother you. So many are brown, the gray, they look like the bark of trees. They do, blend in. But a lot of them, you start looking, they have splashes of green and they camouflage and allows them to blend in with even the lichens of the trees. Lots of eye spots on there for flashing. They flash brightly colored underwings. The Io moths are real good about flashing the bright eye spots on their hind wings. And that's all an adaptation to confuse predators. So moths are pretty interesting organisms. So here's some examples of what we call diurnal or day-flying moths. Of course, these are Madagascan sunset moths. The upper one is the top side, all right? And then the lower one is the underside of that sunset moth. There's another species of this that has, evolved on the other side of the planet. So we have some day-flying moths in South America that are very similar to this Madagascan sunset. But that you can see that is very much the imitation of a butterfly. So the Ailanthus Webworm, of course, is one of our day-flying moths. They fly at night also. I'll have them show up at sheets. They're actually pretty common visitors a lot of times in a lot of the areas I set up. I'll have a couple of those show up. And again, this is a tiny moth, but quite a pattern. I could see somebody, trying to make a blanket or pattern out of that. So, but these are 2 of our diurnal clear-wing sphinx moths that most people have probably seen, and that's the Hummingbird clearwing and the Snowberry clearwing. So these aren't, they're not large moths, but you can see how they, the body style, the coloration is made to imitate a bee. People do mistake them, I guess, for hummingbirds because, even though they're very small, the way they go to the flowers and they nectar the same way and they hover. So a lot of times, that's a case of mistaken identity for saying, well, is that a tiny hummingbird? And there are larger sphinx moths, like our white-lined sphinx, the bandit sphinx, which is not very common here, that kind of have that same similar feeding habit. They have that long proboscis that they put out and to get nectar out of that flower. So in a lot of flowers, they've co-evolved with certain species of moths. There are certain orchids that can only be pollinated by certain species of moths. So it's the moths that are keeping those plants going. But most moths are creatures of the night. And that's what, when we think of a moth, that's what we think of. So take a look at a couple of interesting things here. I always thought this was a nice little fun comic. So, because a lot of times with all our apps and everything, yeah, we're jumping on the internet to try to find stuff. But here is the explanation for moths and their attraction to light. So it's kind of what they call transverse orientation. So a lot of insects navigate by flying at a constant angle relative to a distant light source. And typically, hey, it's the moon. But man-made lights kind of cause that angle to change. And then as the moths fly by, they kind of get confused. There's been science that studied, even how these moths will circle and kind of spiral in and land. So there's a lot of science behind studying what they've done. I believe this little video will run here. So let's see if I can play this for you. So this lantern I have here, this is just a fluorescent lantern I usually bring with me as I'm setting up sheets for a moth night. And this night I was doing a preview. I like to go out, I like to see what shows up, make sure that it's a good spot. And I'd taken everything down, shaken the sheets off. I had this one light still sitting there. And so this is what kind of happens. I mean, they were even hitting my phone. It's beetles, it's all kinds of flies, of course, moths. There's a nice sphinx moth there. So. But attracting moths, again, the light is important for many species, not all. But another way of attracting, of course, and you kind of sit here and you go, oh gosh, I got kind of fruit hours. A lot of moths are also attracted to those types of items. I use actually what is called moth bait. And so it's called baiting or sugaring. There's all kinds, believe it or not, there's all kinds of recipes for moth bait. Some of the simpler European ones that I've been kind of looking at are just basically wine and sugar. But you can use old beer, rotten bananas. I mean, all kinds of crazy fruit. Some of the best sugaring and baiting things that I've heard from people are just rotten watermelon. So it'll work. It's going to attract different moths that are going to be attracted to light. So I set up some ropes. These are just from recent. Before I was able to walk up on the rope, put a light on it. But a lot of the moths had already flown away from here. There were probably 80, 90 moths on that bait rope. And it had just been sitting in basically a fermented fruit mixture. And all kinds of little moths will show up. Yeah, my bait ropes kind of look like snakes. I'm hanging them up. A lot of people go, oh my God, and it just catches them off guard, kind of scares them. It's just the rope I'm using. But it's an interesting thing to see what shows up. And I'll even take the baits, and you don't just have to do it here. A lot of times what people do is they call it, baiting the trees. And I have a paintbrush and I paint it on the trunks of trees. And then, as you're checking the sheets and seeing what's showing up, you go and take a little flashlight, you walk around to the trees and see what's showing up there. You can paint it on the leaves, also some branches. You'll have other insects show up, kind of once the ants really find it, then it's not as a good of thing. That's why I kind of like more of a little freestanding area. It's harder for the ants to find it. If I do tree trunks, they tend to find it pretty quickly. And you'll still get moths there, but they can be starting to bother the moths depending on the species of ants that are there. Mercury vapor lights, very powerful, but a lot of with lighting, I've seen moths attracted to just about any kind of light. The LED lights tend to keep them away, but I've seen some LEDs that hey, they're actually pretty good. And of course, they make LEDs in all kinds of waves of light too. So I have LED black lights that are just absolutely fantastic for bringing in moths and insects. So mercury vapors I use, very hot bulbs and very expensive, but it's for entomologists and people lepidopterists, people that are interested in studying these moths. It's going to be one of the tools of the trade. And then of course the black lighting, all kinds of ways to do that. I like the more clearer, brighter types of black lighting for UV lighting. Again, some moths seem to be a little more attracted to black light than mercury vapor and vice versa. So either one, I use both. So I figure I'm gonna try to get the biggest spectrum I can of what's going to show up for the moths. But there's another cool thing you can do with a blacklight. And I purchased a blacklight flashlight, and I really got it when I went out to West Texas to study scorpions. And but a lot of our caterpillars will glow under a blacklight, especially some of the late instars. So I had a friend of mine. She saw this frass under. She had a vitex tree, and she was like, I know there's caterpillars there. I can't find them. I can't see them. And I said, well, I got a pretty good idea that it's probably a rustic sphinx based on the frass that she had showed me. But I was curious myself. I said, well, borrow this blacklight flashlight. And sure enough, she shined that up there from a distance even. There's that guy glowing, and we were able to get it down. It was ready to pupate. When they have that purplish little sheen to them, that moth pupated within 24 hours. So, and they're pretty good sized cats. Neat sphinx moth. Luna moths will put off a glow. So, if you're just kind of walking along, you're not really going to notice that green like that. But with the blacklight, it will catch your eye with that glowing turquoise and green. And this is a neat photo because if you take a look at it, this is a Snowberry clearwing feeding on coral honeysuckle. Now, again, you got to be one of those crazy people that go out at night with a blacklight, find these caterpillars. But this is the exact same photo. It's just one, the light is turned off and I took a picture with my camera, and the other, the light is on. It's in the same position, same everything. Make the comparison, and that's how easy it is to spot these caterpillars at night with a blacklight flashlight. So another cool fact about caterpillars. Here's an imperial moth feeding. They feed on pine, so interesting. So now I'm going to get into a lot of the moths in our area. And again, like I say, we'll go through this, and certainly throw your questions in the chat. And, we'll spend whatever time we've got after this to answer questions. But most people love the Luna moth. If people pick a favorite moth, a Luna is usually something that people are familiar with. It's been used in commercials for Lunesta. It's been used, Dr. Dolittle flew, in the original version, a giant Luna moth up to the moon even or something. So neat looking caterpillars. Here's the comparison though, between male and female. So you go, oh, well, the females, the male have the real feathery antenna and the females don't. Females still have that feathery antenna. It's just not as large or wide. So there's a difference between those feathery antenna, those bipectinate antennae that we talked about. But for most people, Luna gets them interested in moths. Sucropia moth. This is our largest moth in North America. But I mean, there's several moths we have that, just depending on size of the moth, is still going to be related to the size of the caterpillar. You get a big caterpillar, you're going to get a big moth. But wingspan wise, these are considered to have the largest wingspan. But I have seen some very large Polyphemus moths with close wingspans. And I've also had some large royal walnut moths, same way. So Sucropia moth, beautiful moth, also called a robin moth. So I guess because of the coloration, robin redbreast, that coloration on there. So I've heard that called as a common name. Here's the caterpillar to it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about caterpillars. And then at the end, I've just got a nice little show of caterpillars, just so you can see how interesting and fun the variety you can get out of these guys. They can be quite large. And these are, again, large caterpillars make large moths. They say that these little nodules up here on the head are designed to, they think, to prevent predation, because they kind of look like ladybugs, and ladybugs themselves have a terrible taste for most things that are going to try to eat them. So there again, it's an adaptation. It certainly keeps the head of the animal protected. So Polyphemus, again, one of our nice large silk moths, has those eye spots. They, if they're at rest and the wings are folded over it, and something touches them or taps them, many times they're going to pop those wings open, flash those eyes, and it's designed to deter a predator. So there's the caterpillar to the Polyphemus. Very similar to the Luna moth, by the way. Polyphemus moth and Luna moth, people confuse those all the time. So The imperial moth. This one is sexually dimorphic in the sense that there's really a lot of difference in the pattern for this. Although I've seen even more dimorphism and even some different colored males with a lot more coloration on the very part of the hind wing there. But those ones over to the right, those are mating imperial moths. Now I'm on my 8th generation of captive raised imperial moths bred with wild moths. And so remember I was telling you about the pheromones that these females release and they call males in. So 8 years ago, we got a wild-caught female, got eggs from her and raised caterpillars. And then the following year, the pupa emerged and we got one of the females and put her in a little tent. This is one of those just little pop-ups. And sure enough, male showed up, bred. And we've been doing that every year now for 7 years. So we've been able to get a female out every year, get lucky enough to lure a wild male in, which is, great for genetic variation. We had an absolutely stunning male showed up last year, and the genetics were passed on into the imperial moths that emerged from this year. So kind of fun to just study the genetics of these sometimes. But to catch this mating, you kind of have to stay up till like 2 in the morning, sometimes later. So, but I saved that for a young friend of mine. So, but it's kind of a neat thing to do. And a lot of the moths have different times for showing up with these pheromone lures. The Prometheas tend to show up 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. So if females are calling, the males will be fluttering around while it's still daylight. So another cool fact about moths. The caterpillars can vary in color. They even have orange and different shades of brown. I've been lucky enough to have several of the green ones. Typically they're a dark brown. That little pupa that looks like an alien head there, this is a newly formed pupa that's breaking out of the old caterpillar skin. So when they're ready to do that, the pupa has formed and they burst out of that old skin, and they kind of wiggle around, and this will darken into what you typically think of as a moth pupa, just that dark brown pupa. So with this, what's interesting that this was freshly happening, and I was able to catch a photo of it. Now, I don't know, this could be not for the squeamish, but these are this is, how I end up raising these imperial moths. This one particular year, I had a lot of times I also, help with the NVG, when they want to try to have some caterpillars in the house, for a lot of the moths, I'll supply them what they need for that. So, and the caterpillars, take a while to pupate, so the public is able to watch them and observe them for a while. Let me show you this these guys are just kind of, you'll see that these pupa, I mean, they're moving, they're not just sitting still. So what I did, I always I separate them, I clean them up, and then I'll actually put them into soil, which is how they would normally be in the wild. So I actually make little rows and I put them into the soil and I overwinter them. I have had some overwinter for 2 years. So, but here's a little video of it. So they just kind of wiggle around, and even in the soil, they will wiggle around. So I mean, that's how they, they'll move. Imperial moths especially are real good to tell, hey, this is a healthy pupa, because they move. So, this is the Regal Moth, also called the Royal Walnut Moth. Again, another beautiful local moth, not as common as the imperial. Again, I have, been able to get, I haven't been able to find a female in the wild of this in about 5 years. So that's how, for me, I see people post pictures of them. So, I mean, I know they're out there, but for me to be just lucky enough to find a female to get some eggs, I haven't been able to do that. But I haven't occasionally, have some mate. I've had different genetic lines, and I only rarely have I had them breed in captivity like that. But the caterpillar for these guys, well, that is the one that most people are recognizing as it's the hickory horned devil. So, you know, I was talking, people say, what's your favorite caterpillar? And I was telling them, well, my favorite butterfly caterpillar, well, that's a spicebush swallowtail. My favorite moth caterpillar, hands down, it's the hickory horned devil. So these are hickory horned devils emerging from the eggs. The eggs become kind of clear. You can actually see, you know, the head of that caterpillar. The caterpillar's kind of curled up inside of that egg. Once they emerge, I mean, they're just full of all kinds of little horns and spines, which are harmless to us. These don't have any stinging properties or anything like that. But as they get larger for those instars, they start getting green. They get those big red horns on them. I mean, they look like some, you know, something from a Chinese dragon, you know. So there's, of course, an adult on my fingertip there. I raise these guys on sweet gum. Now, I know a lot of people don't like sweet gum trees, but I'll tell you, I raise lunas on sweet gum. I raise these guys on sweet gum. I raise imperial moths can be raised on sweet gum. So there's several moths that I raise that I'm dependent on sweet gum. So I can't complain. I know it's nature's Lego, the little gum balls, but it's important to keep those native trees for these native moths and caterpillars. And here's a couple of shots of where they're larger. Like I say, very impressive caterpillar. And you, I mean, you can hear them eating. They're big enough, you know, they're crunching, munching. I have to have 5 gallon, you know, if I'm raising these guys and even some of the imperials, I have to have 5 gallon buckets of their food supply so that I'm not making some midnight run to find sweet gum somewhere, because I do not have a sweet gum in my yard. So. And again, quite a large caterpillar. Large caterpillars make large moths. So this caterpillar is almost 6 inches long, and it still did not pupate for a few more days after this. So it may have actually hit that little 6-inch mark. Pupa, again, I put dates on them. I mean, I date these pupas, you know, once I've had them for a year. So you can see the one from 2015 is next to some from 2016. And I've actually had pupa from these guys go 3 years before I get a moth emerge. So, and the moth is perfectly healthy, perfectly fine. So it's, again, an amazing adaptation for these moths. Again, the moth adult itself, these are moths that don't feed. The only thing that ever feeds is the caterpillar for these moths. And all the energy they ever need to get formed and emerge and find a mate is from that caterpillar stage. Here's our Snowberry clearwing. There's a mating pair there. You can see the tiny little eggs. I typically find the eggs for Snowberry clearwings under the leaves. The 2 little caterpillars to the right, you see those 2 green, the darker spots on the leaf. That's where their eggs were, and they'll actually, when they hatch, they eat their egg shells. So it's actual burst of protein, I guess. It may also help predators from hunting things down. So a lot of caterpillars, their first meal is that eggshell. And then the caterpillars begin to feed and grow. Tulip tree silk moth, pretty common. Again, mistaken a lot of times for the Promethea moth, even for Polyphemus. Isabella tiger moth, if you're familiar with the woolly bear caterpillar, these are the species of moths that come from that. So. Yellow-haired dagger and an ovate dagger. The daggers are, you know, a pretty good sized group of moths. Again, attracted to light. So a lot of the photos that are here are moths that I've been able to take photos of as I've set up sheets. So. This is the pecan carpenter worm moth. Notice the antenna, how that's the comb-like antenna that I was talking about, folded against the side of its head there. This moth, when it lands, a lot of times it will stick its body up. Well, if this thing is landed on a tree, it looks like a broken branch. It's, again, an adaptation and a way to blend in. The Francesca carpenter worm moth, this is an interesting moth. Supposedly not common in Virginia, but each year that I've set up lights in the late spring, I've had them show up. I've had them show up in Chesapeake and in Virginia Beach. So I think for the state of Virginia, for one of the apps I use, hey, all the ones that have been found in the state are from where I found them in our local cities. Wave Sphinx. Lots of different Sphinx moths really in our area. Of course, the rosy maple, and of course, the very beginning photo of the moth in the very first slide, that was like, oh wow, that was the most extreme rosy maple moth that I had ever seen. They're somewhat variable, but beautiful. I mean, pink and yellow, who would think? Yeah, so. Saddled prominent. This one, again, would blend in well on a lichen covered tree. It had a lot of green in it, a lot of fluffy hairiness to that thorax. I don't know what species this was. These are some of the they probably feed on grass. There's a lot of grass veneers and things like that, but there's no way I could get that down to a species. So. Bagworm. So most people are familiar with bagworms. Well, this is the male. They have clear wings, very long, slender abdomen. Actually, they can kind of make that pretty long, and they have to, because the females to the bagworms are one of those wingless moths. So we have wingless moths in Virginia. The females will stay inside of those bags. They will mature in there. The males will mate by reaching that abdomen inside of the bag there. The female will lay eggs in there, never leave that bag. And as the eggs hatch, the caterpillars actually will consume the female that's in there. And then, you know, the new caterpillars will come out probably the following spring. And if you've got them on your plants in your yard, that's why you get so many of them. So it only takes a couple of bagworm cocoons full of eggs to start doing a number on your plants. This is the figured tiger moth. I just found this one recently. And again, I checked one of my apps. I wasn't even sure what it was. I thought it might have been one of the other Appenthesis. And sure enough, I'm the only one in the state of Virginia that has a sighting of it. So pretty cool. Virginia tiger moth. We got our own little tiger moth name for us. All right, even its scientific name, Virginica. The Diacme moth has that interesting cross pattern to it. I've seen these in the day. I'll walk through some grasses, I'll take a hike, and a lot of times I'll disturb them and they'll come up flying like that, but they are attracted to lights. The Panapodas, you'll see them pretty often. Hollow spotted angle, not the best picture in the world there. Lots of moths that are similar to that. A bent line carpet moth is very similar to that one also. Maple looper. The Hebrew, this is a very tiny moth. I really had to kind of zoom in to get that shot. They're this real just shimmery white with these intricate little black markings like that. So probably one of my favorite little moths. I always like to see those. Little white lichen moth. So there's one of those moths that they don't eat plants, they eat lichens. Lichens, of course, are a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and usually a protist, some type of an algae. So, and then there's the common Sprigia, but they're also active in the day. I took this shot not too long ago on some mountain men. So they'll show up at night for the lights, and then I've seen them in the daytime too. So kind of like the Ailanthus Webworm. Giant leopard moth, some of you may have been lucky to see some of those. Again, a caterpillar similar to the woolly bear. If you ever find one that's mostly black with these red rings in between, that's what you're finding, that giant leopard moth. The Lunate Sails, there's several different sails. These guys, I was talking about baiting, where you make your own moth bait. Well, trees make their own moth bait. When you get some of those sap bleeds from trees, moths find them at night, and sails are one of the moths that will show up to those. So I've found some of those, natural little sap bleeds in trees, and I'll go out at night, observe them, and see what shows up. And sure enough, there's moths there that are lapping up that sap. I mean, you make syrup from it. So, paler Diacme moth, pretty neat. Very lots of brighter yellows in this. I've seen duller ones, but this one had a real pretty golden yellow to it. course, the yellow striped army worm, not always a friend, kind of like, there's several moths that damage to crops, things like that. So this is one of those moths that can be a problem for people. And I was talking earlier about some of those strikingly colored lichen moths. Well, there it is, the scarlet winged lichen moth. Not a very big moth, but when they show up, you'll notice them. They're really, really neat little guys. Banded tussock, pretty common in our area. And I'm assuming, I don't know if I have any Lepidopterus in the audience there, but there are actually a lot of these tussock moths like this are in this group here. Are kind of hard to tell apart without doing dissections and things like that, but I'm going to claim this as a banded tussock. Hydrangea Sphinx, don't see those too often, but this did show up at one of the moth nights I did out in Chesapeake. Elm Sphinx, pretty good sized Sphinx. They'll show up often enough. I see them during the summer. In case you're wondering, hey, well, what is that moth on? That's a tennis court. Tennis courts are great for finding moths. So I go when everybody's gone and I just kind of start walking around and get my phone out and start snapping pictures. So yeah, great place to look for them. Got those nice bright lights. Plume moth, again, I could not take this down to species. I'm just not that good. But interesting little moths. You don't even think of that as a moth. And of course, the inornate pyrosta, beautiful. This is, again, a very, very tiny moth. Notice its antennae are folded up along its back there, and they're just very slender. So, and then a lot of moths are easily overlooked. Even a lot of the moths I showed would be considered micro moths, but this one is definitely, that's a dime. That's how tiny that little moth is. So this is the Kermi scale moth, and it's actually pretty nicely colored. So, neat little moth. So now I'll talk a little bit about caterpillars. Well, I'll tell you what. Are there any questions based on what we did? And then we can jump into caterpillars for a little bit. I don't have too many more. What do we got? Anything?
I'll ask questions, I guess, at the end of your.
Okay. At the end I didn't know if Alex was monitoring and.
Sorry, we have questions here. We've got quite a few up here throughout the chat so far.
Okay. All right. Well, let's do that since that's kind of fresh from going into moths, and then we'll talk about caterpillars.
Perfect. Okay. So the first one, we've got the difference between the hummingbird clearwing and the snowberry clearwing, and what those differences would be.
For me, I've been studying butterflies and moths since I can remember. I mean, truly 5 and 6 years old. So for me, a lot of things I recognize, including butterflies, flight pattern and all that. To me, the hummingbird clearwing has more of a greenish, that thorax that looks like the bumblebee. It tends to have more of a greenish coloration to it. The wing coloration is different. It's usually a little darker, the markings, the outer edges of everything for the hummingbird clearwing. The snowberry, it tends to look more like the bumblebee, more of a yellowish thorax. The hairs that are there, their scales. That's the caterpillars are quite different looking now. And I believe I have pictures of the caterpillars in here. So for me, I can tell right away. You give me a caterpillar, I can tell you right away what moth it is. In flight, it could certainly be hard to tell the difference, but for me, I've just always recognized them as being either greenish or yellowish, and I would say that 99% of the time it works. So what else we got?
So the next one.
Oh yeah, and Linda said there that the hummingbird clearwing has the white legs and the snowberry has black, so that's definitely one to look for. Yeah, and definitely different host plants.
Are moth caterpillars raised similar to butterflies? Could you speak on that?
Yeah, I raised I raised a lot of them. Like I'll raise lunas in those black pop-ups or white pop-ups that most people use for butterflies. Same way, I replace the plants, as needed. Cleaning, you get a lot bigger frass with these bigger moth caterpillars, but I mean, all the other aspects are really the same. Get the host plant and set them up, and just raise a few. They tend to do better. Smaller numbers of butterflies, and it's also easier for you to keep fed and everything else. So for me, I get an overload of eggs or anything. I mean, I'm putting them out in the wild. So and I mean, they'll take their chances, but I raise enough that I can do a little raise and release for that particular species. Unless I'm working with it to keep a genetic line going. But I find it just as easy as raising butterfly caterpillars. I will have to note that if you are raising moths like the Snowberry Clearwing, which are very easy, they feed honeysuckle. But if you're raising any of those moths that are going to pupate underground, don't raise them in a mesh pop-up, because as they're going to try to bury in the ground, they're going to go down to the bottom of that mesh and go either under a tray if you have it in there, or whatever you have in there, paper towels, and they're going to try to chew and dig, and they will chew holes into your mesh pop-ups. So lesson learned from me. So I use some of the reptile tanks from Exoterra that I raise a lot of moths in that are going to do that burying underground, or they're in a heavy screen container. If I'm doing any of the larger moths like the Imperials, that's what I do now. So yeah.
That actually covered another question we had about overwintering them without them remaining in the soil. So thank you for clarifying that.
Well, you can. Well, it's kind of a separate question. I'm experimenting a little bit this year, but I've seen and heard of people, hey, I'm in moth groups, that, they'll just keep their pupas, on paper towels over winter. Just like with butterflies, you don't want to have them, in warm or very, high light conditions, because it can trigger them to emerge at the wrong time. I mean, you can still have things emerge at the wrong time, but you certainly don't, want to force it. So mine are kept in a garage where, I mean, it doesn't really freeze, which wouldn't hurt them. They're designed to, be an inch or two underground, and they do fine. So I think I've had some where I've gone with pine shavings, not cedar, but and had them just bury in that and keep that for the following year, especially with snowberries, and have no trouble emerging. I'll do an occasional misting, for a little bit of moisture, but a lot of times, probably better to be more on the less end of that. I mean, there is some humidity in the air in my garage. I think that does them fine, but I tend to mist the soil periodically. For a lot of them, like the hickory horn devils, I'll actually dig up and check the pupa. So about once a month, I'll gently, move that soil, dig around. Of course, they're moving, they move. They're not going to be in the spot I put them in. And I'll dig them up, I'll take them out, I'll give them a nice little, misting of water. I'll re-moisten the soil if I need to, and then I'll put them back like that. But they can be raised probably just on a surface and have no trouble. So I think you can do that. I'm going to experiment this year with some of the Imperials just on paper towels, and I'm sure they're going to be fine. So what else we got?
Could you go over some of the main host plants for Sucropia and Polyphemus caterpillars?
Let's see. I usually raise Sucropia on cherry, but there's the moths are tend to have a few more options for food, unlike some of the butterflies that are very one type of plant specific. But a lot of them will tend to eat a couple of different types of our native trees. Again, the importance of natives. So I've raised Sucropia on cherry. That's usually my plant of choice. Polyphemus, I struggle with Polyphemus because they feed oak, and the oaks just don't hold up well for me. So I have to have a pretty constant supply where I'm pretty much replacing that oak every day. You know, cherry, I can have cherry go a few days, you know. Of course, if they're big, they're going to eat it within, you know, several hours. But, you know, the smaller ones, I can keep them feeding on cherry for easily, and I don't have to worry as much. But so with my Polyphemus, for me, I use oaks. I mean, there are other options out there, but oak seems to be, in our area, their plant of choice. Luna's easy, again, sweet gum. You know, the Imperial Moth, you get lucky to get some of those. I mean, they are cool because they feed on pine, but they also eat sweet gum. So, but yeah, just familiarize yourself with host plants. In the end, I'll show you one of the field guides I use for caterpillars, and if you're really interested in that, get that field guide. It's Wagner's, and that really will give you a good list of host plants. That's probably the best thing to recommend. But it's interesting, you know, you asked that question because in certain areas, you know, of the country, I mean, these moths range, you know, from Canada to Florida for many of them, and they have, you know, kind of regional favorites of what they want to eat. So sometimes it can be like that. So.
All right, I've got one more here.
And
Question.
Karen and Steve said they have done Polyphemus on maple and birch. Yeah, they're lucky enough to have birch. So and willow oak works, which is what I have in my yard. So and the chestnut oak is good too. But yeah, they like those oaks. What else?
So we've got another one more question here. I guess it's more of a clarification, but did you say that the bagworm cats eat the dead female in the bag when they emerge?
No, it's, well, yeah, that's what I've read. I think when the eggs hatch, the female is still there, whether she's, you know, on the verge of dying or whatever, but I think they kind of, you know, I think that's their first little meal, and then they're going to, you know, leave that bag and they have to go feed on plants. So if I'm not mistaken, I think that is part of that cycle.
And we got one more that just came in here. The oak worms and maple worms are in the Saturnidae family, but are so much smaller than your average silkworm. Do they also have vestigial mouthparts?
I would, if they're in that family, like, you know, rosy maple moths, the beautiful pink and yellow one, no mouth parts. Yeah, no workable mouth parts. So yeah, the adults don't feed. Yeah, there's no proboscis or anything for them to feed with. So yeah, so
All
probably in that same family. Yes, that's absolutely right. So.
And with that, it kind of wraps up the questions that we've had submitted thus far.
Okay, all right. So now we'll jump into caterpillars here. So again, lots of interesting caterpillars for the moth world. Masters of camouflage, venomous stings. I mean, everybody sees the caterpillar on this tree, right? So yeah, it's right in the middle. It's right in the center. Well, let's see. I should be able to see if I can get my slide to move here. It's frozen. Let's see. I guess it said, oh, you stopped for too long. Let me close this chat box here. There we go. So there's a close-up. I'll go back for you. So if you look right in the center of that picture, well, this is one of the underwing moth caterpillars. There it is. And I've got it in my hand so you can see it. I mean, this caterpillar is designed to blend in with a lichen-colored oak tree. So really, really good masters of camouflage. Here's one of the loopers. They decorate themselves. This will turn into one of the little, probably the wavy emerald. They call them camouflage looper caterpillar. This one decorated itself with bits of coneflower petals. And of course, to the right, that's another one of the inchworms, just saying, well, I'm just going to look like a stick and nothing will bother me. So it's holding on with its hind legs, the head and the forelegs are up in the front there. Unicorn caterpillars, kind of neat. There's other caterpillars that really, you know, can resemble the edge of a leaf, but these a lot of times will look like a browning part of a edge of a leaf. I've found them on cherry. I found them on elm. So variety of plants for this guy. I found them on redbud, American redbud. And then these are just a variety. There's one of the tussock moths there. A lot of the moths that are very hairy, can cause irritations for some people. So reactions, allergic reactions. So a lot of the hairier caterpillars are probably a no-touch thing for some people. Here's another type of worm, caterpillar that feeds on pine. So this is the Teresa Sphinx caterpillar. They look like this big blown up submarine balloon or something, but they feed on pentas and a couple of our other plants that are kind of like weeds. They feed on buttonweed. The other ones, those are Promethea caterpillars. So the Promethea moth. Those are on cherry. The one to the left, that is a nice long tail there. That's a young pawpaw sphinx. So I'm not sure of the other sphinx there. That it's I'm not sure what species that was. Somebody may recognize it. So another, you know, this is one of the Virginia creeper sphinx caterpillars. The other one to the left, I just thought this pattern looked like the pattern almost to like a canebrake or, you know, the timber rattlesnake. I forget the name of that one. I found this actually feeding on milkweed. So it's another, but it is a moth. So the American dagger is to the left. That's a Henry saltmarsh caterpillar over to the right. Again, those guys they're kind of spiky and hairy again. So usually for some people they can cause them to, you know, a reaction. This is a skiff moth. There's an older instar. So just like with butterfly caterpillars, we have instars for moth caterpillars. Although some moth caterpillars can go through more instars. But these guys move around. They move like a slug. They don't really have the prolegs like other caterpillars do. And they just kind of glide along. They don't leave a slug trail. They're not a slug. But interesting caterpillars. Again, most people when they find these, they have no idea what they're looking at. I've had people, you know, kind of say, hey, this fell on my car windshield, you know, and it's like, man, that's a skiff moth. You're lucky. So. But these are the things that sting. We do have several caterpillars that have the ability to sting, and most of them are in that slug moth family. You may have heard of the puss caterpillar. Oh, there was all kinds of big internet stuff going around with the puss caterpillar, and I've found them. I used to have them at my house pretty consistently. Never got stung by those. I've been stung by every one of these in these pictures, just by, you know, just exploring or you know, not even realizing they're there. And then, you know, I start getting a little itch or sting and I think, okay, there's probably a saddleback around if I'm out and, you know, trying to collect. The Io moths, as careful as I was cleaning their cage and replacing food, I'd go in, I'd remove something and there'd be one under some of the leaves I wasn't paying attention to, and it'd zip around and the spines would get me. But for me, I didn't have anything severe with it. For me, it was a short-lived, kind of an itchy burn. But again, for some people, these can be major problems. The Io moths and the buck moths, they're in the same family. I mean, I knew a girl that was at a camp and put her backpack on the ground, picked her backpack up, put it on her leg. There was a buck moth caterpillar that was on the ground. I got on her leg and she got pretty sick. So she got pretty good, you know, filling of the venom from those spines. So, but even the moth pupa are interesting. This is the only one I took. So this is again one of the Sphinx moths. Again, the proboscis is what's coiled up there. I believe this is probably one of the rustic Sphinx. And of course, moths, just like our butterflies, they have all kinds of parasites that will attack them. They're caterpillars. So tachinid flies, these were inside of the pupa of Snowberry clearwings. And I can't tell that there's anything wrong with those cats. I just know that if I'm collecting late instar cats or even some of the early instar cats, they could be infected by this tachinid fly. I get one giant tachinid fly out of there. But that's the Snowberry clearwing pupa that they came out of, and their cocoons are, I raised these guys, I put in some bark, so you were talking about different substrates. So even though they would bury into the ground, I was experimenting with some reptile bark, some shredded bark, and they kind of just weave a very simple cocoon. It's easy to tear open and just pop the pupa out, but that's what came out. And of course, Braconid Wasps. Now, of course, these are not eggs that are on this caterpillar. This caterpillar has already been destroyed from the inside out. Basically, those Braconid Wasps larvae were feeding inside on all the organs of that caterpillar, and they're ready to come out. Well, a wasp, these types of wasps also spin a cocoon, and that's what's on these caterpillars. They're wasp cocoons that within a few days, tiny little wasps are going to emerge and go find some more caterpillars to infect. Here's my guides that I like. There's two Peterson guides now. One is southeastern North America, one's northeastern North America. The northeastern North America, as far as the range maps go, contain Virginia. And the southeastern one leaves us off. But I use both. Because we're at the dividing line. So we'll get like say the Bandit Sphinx. I know the McCurdy's have had more luck finding those than anybody. And it's more of a southern moth, but it makes its way into Virginia and just about to here. So it's I use both, and then I can't find a better caterpillar guide to recommend you than that David Wagner caterpillar guide. So lots of amazing caterpillars, but if you want to know host plants, things like that, and even some clues, read a lot of the intro stuff in there that David's got in there, and he'll tell you how to find caterpillars if that's something that interests you. So, and then of course, packing up one of my moth nights there, David even took this picture. So, but I enjoy it. I can always find something different or something else that I haven't gotten a picture of that I can do. So when I'm out doing a moth night. So let me go ahead and I'll stop share. And so what else we got, Alex? Anything new?
So I do have one more question that came in. Linda wants to know if anyone knows why the Sphinx moth pupa create a separate chamber for their proboscises.
Yeah, that's a good question. And not all do that. Not all. I mean, because you would think, a Snowberry clearwing, would have, one sticking out there, and they don't. I don't know. It's so weird looking. That's a good question that I don't know the answer to. So somebody could probably look that up. But yeah, I don't know. And I mean, those proboscis, they're long. I mean, for some of the Sphinx moth, exceptionally long. And for some of those orchids that are in certain parts of like Madagascar, South America, I mean, the moths that pollinate those have to have an extremely long proboscis, but they do. So coevolution for that. Anything else?
It looks like that was the last question that we have. And at the moment, oh, here we go. We got one more. How would you recommend the best way to become familiar with the most common moth families?
I'll tell you, the way I learned is experience. Take some photos and try to figure out what you have, and that's I'm old school. I mean, I will jump into my field guides first. Now I try to, and just going through my field guides, trying to find certain moths or certain caterpillars familiarizes me with those common moth families. And so using either of those moth field guides as you're going through, you're going to go, okay, wait a minute. Now these are, I got this type, this family of moth, this family of moth. That's probably, I don't know. I'm a teacher. I think kind of teaching yourself and learning that way is the best way to really familiarize yourself. I mean, there are apps, but I don't know. I just seem to get a lot more. I'll use an app to verify what I think I have ID. That's how I work kind of backwards. So.
All right, I think so. That's the last question that we have in. I just want to thank you guys all for sharing your evening with us as well. Thank you, Maurice, for this awesome presentation. Just a reminder, we have another amazing one planned for this upcoming Friday on monarch migration, which we're really excited about, especially this time of year. So definitely recommend you guys to tune in for that. This will be, or this was recorded, this information along with the previous recordings from Monday and Tuesday will be shared by the end of the week. Additionally, it will all be uploaded to our webpage under the Butterfly House section. So thank you again for tuning in tonight, and hopefully we'll see you guys Friday. Thank you.
All right. Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Good
Had a
night.
great time. Thanks.
Appreciate it.